webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for this question and answer session around the Regional Food Economies Fellowship Program offered by the Wallace Center. My name is Will Gray and I'm the Program Officer managing this work. And I am joined today by John Fisk, our Director, and my colleague Ellie Baumstein, who is coordinating the program. Before we get started today and get too deep into it, I wanted to let you know how we're going to be handling questions. Because there are a good number of you on the call today, we're going to keep everybody muted throughout the whole presentation. And we'll be asking you to type your questions into the questions box included in the GoToWebinar control panel, and then we will work through all of them at the end of the presentation. So you'll find the questions bar in the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you press down on the little caret to expand the menu, you'll be able to type in your question and send it on over to us. Please don't feel the need to wait until the end. We'd love to, if you came today with a bunch of questions, feel free to start loading them in. We'll get a good group put together and then work through them towards the end of the presentation once we've had a chance to work through everything. Ellie, could you advance the slide? If we can't get to all of your questions today, just so you know, we'll be posting written answers on our Wallace Center Regional Food Economies website by the end of the week. So everything that we talk about and everything that we don't get a chance to talk about, we'll get some answers written and posted. And this webinar is also being recorded, and we'll post that recording of the webinar for you as well. So you'll have the opportunity to make sure that that we do answer your questions, even if we can't get to it in today's hour. So I'm going to just briefly let you know what we're going to cover today, and then we will pass it off and get to it. We're going to start out with a little bit about us at the Wallace Center and our work, and then zoom in on our Regional Food Economies initiative and the work that we're doing that has informed this program, and then give you a quick overview of the fellowship offering and our goals around putting it together. Then we're going to transition into a little bit of the logistical weeds of the proposal development and submission process. And then finally, we'll get to your questions, hopefully with plenty of time left to work through all of them and make sure that everyone feels good about the process going forward. So to start talking about the Wallace Center, I'm going to pass the mic here to our director, John Fisk, to let you know a little bit about who we are and where we're coming from. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Will. Happy to be with all of you today. I know that a lot of you are probably aware of the Wallace Center and familiar and have been engaged with us in the past, but I suspect there's a good number of you that have not. So let me take a minute here to talk a little bit about who we are and where we're coming from. The Wallace Center builds partnerships, we pilot new ideas, and we're seeking to advance solutions that catalyze environmentally responsible and socially inclusive food and farming systems. Part of our goals are that we're really seeking economically viable and environmentally sound small and mid-sized farm and food businesses, and we work directly on that goal, as you'll see through our programs. We're also seeking greater food and farming driven economic and community development in both rural and urban areas, and stronger and more resilient community-based food and farming organizations. Now, to achieve these goals, we work in a number of different ways. First, we identify and pilot and spread emerging models and practices. We work actively to cultivate learning networks and communities of practice, part of which you'll see through this program. We build capacity through technical assistance in a variety of ways. And we try to bring awareness and understanding to new audiences, a broader set of audiences. And we try to connect practitioners and enterprises to resources. In this way, we feel we can drive towards those inclusive and responsible food and farming systems across the country. Next, in terms of how we're structured and how we're focused, we have 3 initiatives. That's how we break down our work at the Wallace Center. One being regional food economies. A second being something we call the Pasture Project, which has a focus on rotational grazing, as well as conservation and agriculture with a geographic focus in the Midwest. And a third initiative on community-based food systems, which really builds capacities in communities using food systems to develop community and using community to develop a safer and more nutritious, locally based food supply chain. The work that we're going to be talking about today primarily comes out of our Regional Food Economies initiative. So next slide, please. The Regional Food Economies initiative is comprehensive in nature. It takes both a kind of a strategic, big picture system view, as well as a technical assistance, kind of tactical, direct set of actions within it. In that bigger picture, we're really looking to build the case for and help people understand and really kind of change that narrative around the role that food systems can play in both community and economic development in order to drive it further. We see it across the landscape, but we're thinking that a more comprehensive approach and a coordinated approach will really help accelerate this work. At the same time, that meta work we complement with on-the-ground work through things like trainings, capacity building, enterprise development, technical assistance. We do a lot of work around food safety for small and mid-sized farms. And why do we do that? Because these are barriers to scaling, barriers to having a stronger and more resilient local and regional food value chain. So next slide. So I touched a little on this. The Regional Food Economies Fellowship Program is within this idea of building the case, right? So which has two dimensions in our mind. We're looking to build a bridge between the community and economic development stakeholders, which is a whole set of folks in many ways outside of the regional food sector. So it's a bridge between the regional food sector and a new sector. Now, I know many of you have built bridges in your area. What we're looking to do is to do more of that, replicate it, expand it, find new ways of doing that. So we believe that building those bridges between these communities is really going to be key to starting to mobilize some of the regional food systems for the outcomes that we're looking for and the goals that I talked about earlier. Part of that, we think, is really changing the narrative, right? I used to say, and I still do sometimes, I tend to think about it as when I read about food systems, I often read about it on the entertainment page in the newspaper or the food page or the food guide. I want to read about it on the business page, right? I want to see us talking about the dominant narrative being food systems is good for community, food systems is good for our economy, food systems is good for our health, that kind of thing. So what is it going to take to change that narrative as part of this fellowship? And we believe part of that is having information, having data, having cases, having illustrations that demonstrate that this can be done. But it's also about engaging and building those bridges so that it's not just a case, so you have someone to talk to about the case. So it's really a comprehensive approach to starting to move the ball forward and changing that narrative and also putting some meat on the bones around how we do this. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie to talk about the fellows in particular. And if you have other questions about Wallace Center or the larger strategy that we have in here, put those in your question box, and if we don't get to them today, again, as Will said, we can follow up at another time. Thank you.
Thanks, John. This is Ellie Baumstein. As Will said, I am managing this Regional Food Economies Fellows program. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the goals of the program and also the application process and give you all a few tips and pointers to how to submit a successful application. John alluded to a lot of this earlier, but the goals of this program are to deepen existing efforts and explore new opportunities to position regional food systems as a community and economic development priority. As he was saying, we're looking to find examples of places and projects where people are bridging the gap between stakeholder groups that haven't been engaged with regional food before and those regional food organizations that Wallace Center works with a lot. So we want to find those efforts, we want to accelerate them, we want to learn more about them and share them. So we're also trying to raise the profile of regional food within the stakeholder groups. So that means having an economic developer say, let's start a new project around food, or having a hospital say, hey, how do we work with local farmers? Trying to put regional food sort of top of mind for new stakeholder groups. We also want to develop tools to help food systems practitioners apply best practices and engage new audiences. So let's say someone did a really great project in Colorado connecting regional council with a food hub. Let's teach somebody in Texas how to do the same thing. Let's teach somebody in Idaho how to do the same thing. Create a community of practice around the goals of this work. Wallace Center does a lot connecting people in disparate geographies who are working on similar projects. We find that it's a really good way to share best practices, to stop people from having to reinvent the wheel, and to sort of build solidarity and connection between organizations. So those are the sort of overarching goals of the Fellows program. I was talking about these new targeted stakeholder groups. So we kind of came up with a list of the types of people that we think aren't paying enough attention to regional food and who might be helpful in advancing the goals of this program. So those groups are regional planning and development. So those are your old school economic developers, regional councils, metro planners, people who make big decisions about how cities and states spend money on economic development. Also investment and finance. Sometimes investing in food businesses is not the same as investing in other types of businesses. So we're trying to find some progressive and creative investors who might want to step up and invest in some of these regional food businesses. Applied research is another one. We're talking about cooperative extension. We're talking about small business development centers, people who are used to either dealing with food or dealing with businesses, but not necessarily putting those pieces together. Agriculture services, places like the Farm Bureau and farmers unions that traditionally focus on commodity crops rather than specialty, and trying to show them that regional food is definitely a part of the picture as well. And then public health organizations who more and more are seeing linkages between community health and community economic development, and we're trying to build a bridge there as well, thinking about how local economies and how local food plays a role in community health. So as a fellow, you'll receive a set of benefits from the Wallace Center. This includes a stipend that is meant to support the fellows' project activities. They'll also receive financial support for outreach and presentation efforts, with the idea being that someone can go to an economic development conference or a Farm Bureau conference and present on regional food. Also financial support for face-to-face convenings of the peer network of fellows. We want to build up, some relationships between the fellows so that they can share and learn from each other. Also support for developing tools to help food systems practitioners. We're thinking about reports, webinars, case studies that people who want to try these things out in their communities can use. And then also an amplified voice and an elevated profile. Wallace Center is really excited to share all of the learnings and really accelerate the people who are doing great work in these areas, and that's another benefit of being a fellow. So if this still all sounds good to you, here's a couple questions you can ask yourself to decide if this is the right opportunity for you. First of all, are you based in the US? Wallace Center only works domestically. Do you have experience working in or with one of the targeted stakeholder groups? I think a lot of local food systems people want to talk to these people but haven't yet. We want someone who really knows how to walk the talk with these stakeholder groups. But at the same time, we really want someone that understands regional food systems and has experience dealing in that sector as well. We also need someone who wants to help others along. We're really interested in transparency and sharing with this network, so we want to make sure that our fellows are willing to share what they've learned. We also want to make sure that the stipends are going to support project work and time for the fellows and not buying hardware or equipment or anything hard. We want to see investment in people. So then the last thing is we are really interested in tracking and reporting and learning about the outcomes of these fellowships. So anybody that's looking to keep all of their work secret is probably not a great fit for this fellowship. So if you said yes to all of these questions, then you are in luck. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the submission and the timeline. Hopefully all of you have had a chance to look over the request for applications. But that and some more information about Wallace Center and about this project can be found at this website. So feel free to head over there. And that's also where we're going to put answers to any questions that we don't get to answer today. So that website is good to keep in mind. So here's a little timeline, and again, this is in the RFA. Right now we're in the prepare and submit applications period. Applications are due April 2nd by 8 p.m. We will not be reviewing late applications, so please do your best to get those in on time. April 2nd by 8 p.m. We are going to then spend a good chunk of the month of April reviewing the applications and selecting the winners. We will let the selected fellows and those who were not selected know by April 27th for a period of performance from May 1st, 2018 to April 30th, 2019. April 2nd by 8 p.m. Don't forget. So again, this is pulled from the RFA as well, but here's a little bit more detail about what we're looking for in the application. There's 56 people on this webinar right now, and we have a small handful of fellowships to award. So not following these rules is a really easy way for us to eliminate people. So we really stress the importance of no longer than 5 pages. Don't forget your cover page. We want to see resumes and CVs for all the people who will be working on this project. And we are allowing some addendums to be attached to your applications, but we're not going to be reading anybody's 30-page master's thesis on, their work. So try and keep them succinct, try and keep them short. We do want to, see proof that you are a strong candidate, but we're not likely to spend a bunch of time, reading a really long document. So just keep that in mind. Okay, here are a couple tips and pointers. First of all, in the RFA, we ask a really intentional suite of questions that we hope that you will answer. We asked each of those questions for a reason, so we strongly suggest that you respond to every single prompt. That means that your transition sentences aren't so good, or that you leave out a little bit of the narrative shading that you like to have in your writing, but you hit all of those questions. That's much more important to us. That's how we're going to score the application. So if you skip any of those prompts, you're maybe not going to get a score on that item. It goes without saying, but being succinct and specific is very important. Chances are we're going to look at a large number of these, so we need to really understand exactly what you are intending to do with this stipend in your narrative. We're talking about building a bridge and learning to sort of translate between two different sectors that haven't worked together before. And one thing that's going to be really important there is avoiding jargon. Don't dig really far into technical terminology or abbreviations. We want you to show us that you're a kind of person that can explain regional food economies to an economic developer and economic development to a regional food business. Sort of to that point as well, we're really looking for the what you're doing and the how you're doing it. Why this is important is not really something that we need to hear from you. As we laid out, we know that there's a lot of barriers for regional food businesses. We know that demand for local food is growing. We don't need you to explain back to us why that's important. So don't waste a bunch of real estate, laying out why this is important. Instead, tell us what you're going to do to achieve the goals that we've laid out. One important why question, though, is why now? Tell us about the ripeness of the project that you're working on, and explain to us why you're ready to take it to the next level and share what you've learned. And here's a little Snoopy cartoon because everybody loves Snoopy. Okay. Again, a lot of this is written out in a little bit more detail in the RFA, but our review criteria, we're looking for fellows who have proven expertise both in regional food economies and in whatever targeted stakeholder group they will be focused on. We're looking for people that are trying innovative strategies. We want someone who has clearly articulated their program plan. We want to know what you're going to do with this money and why you wouldn't be able to do it without this money. We want to see some examples of the tools and resources that you will develop as part of your fellowship to help bring other people along to follow your example and use some of the best practices that you've learned. So be clear with how you intend to create those to teach other people. Social equity and inclusion are incredibly important values to the Wallace Center, and we will be selecting for fellows that demonstrate commitment to social equity and inclusion as well. So consider that in your application. And then lastly, as we've talked about, Wallace Center is interested in creating a community of practice where lots of different types of people can come together, learn from each other, share what they've experienced, and raise all boats together. So we need people that are willing to share what they've learned, to report on what they've learned, and to be transparent about the use of these funds. So that was quick, you guys. We are going to open the floor up to questions. I don't know if anybody has submitted any yet. Will, I think that's on you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, we've got all sorts of great questions coming in, and please feel free to keep them coming. The first question was, can the addendum include the work by collaborating partners, or does it have to be the work of the person applying for the fellowship? That's a great question. I would say that if this collaboration is sort of integral to the work that you're doing, using the addendum to showcase that partnership, it would be a great use, and I think that would be a very acceptable and useful way of letting us know something that might be beyond the scope of the narrative. So I think that would be great. Another question says, in the program overview and purpose, it states consumer demand for sustainably grown local and regional agricultural products offers unprecedented opportunity for greater financial viability of small and mid-scale family farms and following. And the thrust of the question is, does this mean that seafood-related work in the economy would not be included? That's another great question. I would say that seafood-related projects are definitely a part of this broader regional food system approach, and that they were not excluded intentionally. And so thank you for that, and that would absolutely be an acceptable body of work to tell us about. Another one that I knew we were going to get, and I was waiting for the first one, was, can you give a definition of regional? Is this across states? Is this within states? So particularly where this sort of holistic development strategy is concerned, one of the reasons that we talk about regional economies and not local economies is that we recognize how different those terms are in different places and in different sectors. So the shortest answer is probably no. We specifically did not want to box off regional. Across states and within states might both be in different places, perfectly acceptable. We could see, very progressive and impactful work being done hyper-locally at the community level. We could also see extremely progressive work being done as a multi-state collaboration. Both would be fine. What we do want to make sure is that the food system beneficiaries of that work are our local and regional farmers, fishers, and growers that are contributing to their local and regional economy. Also had a question about the number of fellowships that are going to be awarded, and a great question about profiles of former fellows. So I can take those two together and say, first of all, that this will be the inaugural cohort of this program. So we do not have any prior fellows. We're hoping that everybody on this call are going to be future prior fellows, but right now this will be the first time we've put together a group like this. So in this first cohort, I think we anticipate 6 to 8, making 6 to 8 fellows, and then sort of moving from there. But that first batch size, I think, will be 6 to 8 members. And I also wanted to ask about this question of, can the fellowship be awarded to a team of several people? That's also a great one. I think as an approach, if this is a sort of a team or a sort of coalition-based approach, that would be perfectly acceptable. We would likely want to see CVs and resumes for all participating members, And if we moved forward programmatically, there would likely be one sort of key point of contact for the programmatic work. But if we recognize that this is collaboration-based and partnership-based work, and so if there are multiple parties involved, that's perfectly fine, and we would anticipate that. The actual, the functional award would be made to a single entity, but we could talk about the sort of specific ramifications of that. And if that doesn't answer that question, or if there's further clarification needed on that, feel free to sort of say so, and we can take that one offline, because I know that can be a little bit hairy. A question regarding the CV and resume reviews and what level of detail we are looking for. Also a good one there. I think the purpose of that function is to let the reviewing team better understand the sort of individual and organizational qualifications of the submitting applicant. So particularly because we anticipate, as John was saying at the beginning of this presentation, we recognize that there is a mix here of folks that we may have worked with in the past and folks that are very, very new to us. That's part of the intended benefit of the CV and resume, is that it gives you an opportunity to show us where your professional experience and how your professional experience has prepared you for this role.
And just oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to tag on to that and say, we understand that we're asking for a lot in a 5-page narrative. So we wanted to give people an opportunity to tell us a little bit about themselves and their professional experience without wasting any space in that 5-page narrative, which we're really hoping will be, very focused on the project work.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. We had a request for a little more clarification around examples of tools or resources to be developed by fellows. Ellie, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So as I was saying, we're hoping that fellows will be people who have some experience working to bridge the gap between their stakeholder group and regional food economies. And so we hope that that person will have a little bit of an understanding of where the sort of translation breakdowns might be between those two groups, and can share with us some ideas of tools that they would create to help empower regional food business owners to be able to communicate with let's say an economic developer. So for example, if an economic developer's #1 priority is living wage jobs, and a regional food economy's #1 priority is, preserving farmland acres, perhaps there could be a tool that says, hey, instead of talking about farmland acres, why don't you talk about the number of people that are working on that farmland acre, so that the economic developer understands why this is a good investment on their part. So just some ideas of things that could be usable to someone who works in regional food when they wanted to approach someone in the stakeholder group to try and convince them to support their work.
Great, thanks, Ellie.
Sure.
I have a couple questions here about the timeline for in-person fellows meetings, questions about sort of ensuring that availability that the right people could be available for the right things. Mm-hmm. The quick answer is we do not have specific dates or locations set right now, because we want to be able to, for exactly that reason. I mean, we want to be able to engage the cohort as a group and make sure that we can find something that that works for everyone. Broadly, we anticipate a sort of kickoff meeting early in this program. So if awards are issued in with a beginning in sort of period of performance beginning in May, we would guess that there would be probably a May-June get together for folks to better understand the work that each other is doing and put faces with names and come together as a group. I think we could also anticipate in a 12-month program that there would be another face-to-face convening towards the end of the period, where we could talk about best practices, work that has been successful, or challenges that we've faced, and tool development, and find some other opportunities for face-to-face collaboration. So I know that's not a perfectly specific answer, but hopefully that's part of the but hopefully that helps get to the heart of that question.
We definitely are really interested in making sure that all of the fellows are able to attend any of those group convenings. So we'll work pretty hard to make sure that they're in places and during time periods that are available to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. A question about the value of whether or not geographic diversity among fellows is part of as a consideration in the process, as well as urban versus rural work, and sort of the spectrum of, as we spoke to before, local to regional to sort of multi-state. That's a great question. I would say those are all absolutely considerations. We recognize that there are such different approaches and partnerships in different regions, in different geographical regions, urban versus rural, and we look forward to embracing a diversity of approaches through this program. Because the cohort size is fairly small, I'll tell you that we are not approaching this with a rigid lens of this has to be here and this has to be there, but we are definitely embracing a spirit of diversity across a number of dimensions, in making sure that we elevate a number of different approaches for work that is very holistic in its nature. A question about eligibility, asking, is this focused on nonprofits, or can the fellowship be for individuals working in the private sector? This is not focused necessarily or exclusively on nonprofits. Private sector partners, public sector, higher learning, all are welcome. The only thing that we will require at the administrative level is that the award be made to an incorporated entity. So it cannot make it to an individual doing business under a social security number, but any incorporated entity, be that a private sector, LLC, a single member, whatever else is fine. But that just a sort of functional administrative point. We cannot give it to an individual. I will just because I see this popping up on a couple things. For folks who joined us late, I will just reassert, this is being recorded. This recording, all of the questions, all the answers to those questions, and any additional questions that we do not get to during the broadcast will be posted online on this program's website, which is wallacecenter.org/RFE, Regional Food Economies, and that should be up by the end of the week. Another question here about sort of how the distinction between sort of how the stipend will flow, if it's tied to an individual, if it's tied to an organization. It basically coming down to, does it need to be paid directly to the individual? The answer to that is no. Again, I think at an administrative level, the way that this will work is the support will be given to the organization, be that an LLC, a nonprofit. The recipient will be the organization. In practice, what we are trying to do is, in all the ways that Ellie has talked about, we're trying to elevate the work, sort of accelerate the work and elevate the profile of individuals doing it. And so while functionally this will move through an organization, and it will have the name of the check, as it were, would have the name of an organization on it and not the name of an individual. In practice, we do, part of the real, one of the real powerful outcomes of this work, we hope, is a cohort of individuals and organizations that we can point to and elevate for that work. And so while it wouldn't need to move to that individual directly, and so yes, it could be housed within Extension, yes, it could be housed within an existing nonprofit or a for-profit. I think the 3 questions that I've seen around this topic. But we would, part of the value of asking for resumes and CVs is that the public-facing aspects of this work will, I think, definitely elevate an individual and their work, and we hope that that's a major benefit of the program. A couple of questions here about how sort of the tension between current and new work, and can this program support work that is already underway as opposed to a fully new organization. Part of the reason that we defined this the way that we did is that we are looking for people that are already deeply engaged in this process. And to that end, it is perfectly acceptable for this fellowship to be a thing that increases the impact and raises the profile of work that you are already doing. And that's going to be a big part of the narrative development, is for you to tell us what's happening now. And then in addition, what would be different or what more you could take on through this program. So we're trying to thread the needle on that a little bit. This does not need to be a start to finish new process. And in fact, I think we anticipate that it won't be, because we know how sort of relationship intensive and time intensive this kind of work is. What we want to do is hear about what you're doing now to address these challenges, and hear about what you can be doing through this opportunity to have some additional support and to have a sort of elevated platform to tell your stories and help build the case. A question about the review process. That's a good one. About who will be reviewing submitted applications. We're going to use an internal review here. So this will be process will be reviewed by the Wallace Center. I hope that answers that question. And then a couple of clarifying questions. So I want to make sure I'm being clear around the relationship between the organization and the individual. Yes, the award will go to an incorporated entity, whether that be a, in my case, if I don't, unfortunately, Ellie told me that I'm not eligible for this award, but if I was, the actual funding would go to the Wallace Center, but I would be the sort of individual named fellow. It would be my resume and my CV. And if if the work that I was trying to push forward was a multi-partnership, like a multi-sector partnership, I would also include resumes and CVs from my partners in order to better round out that whole approach. But the only point of funding would be to a single organization. And that organization could be nonprofit, for-profit, public. That does not require a 501c3. Great question about continuity, that if this is successful, what's the long-term outlook of this program? We are extremely excited about this approach, and we believe that that building this case for regional food systems as a driver of community and economic development is the next step in the ongoing evolution of local and regional food systems. So we are very committed to it. We hope to make this the first of many cohorts to come. and we will undoubtedly be working very closely with the selected recipients on add-on support on future opportunities nationally and regionally, and hope that this continues not just for 12 months, but long into the future.
Will, I see a good one here that says, do you prefer fellows embedded in one type of stakeholder group reaching out to another, or do you prefer bridge building between two or more stakeholder groups? And I think that warrants a little bit of clarification. The way I see it is we're looking for someone that's building a bridge between regional food systems and one of the stakeholder groups specifically. So that is kind of the connection that we're looking for, is between people working on regional food and people working, in the impact investment sector, let's say. So not between, impact investing and healthcare. We're looking for food systems to the stakeholder groups.
Thanks, Ellie. That's a great one.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one.
There's a question about level of effort that I think is another one that warrants some unpacking, that basically amounts to, do you have an estimate of how much time that would be required to dedicate to this sort of outside of face-to-face or sort of group meetings? I think the easiest answer to that is that we don't see this as a sort of as like we're hiring a consultant or something like that. So we don't have a true vision of the number of hours through this. This is meant to be a contribution that sort of accelerates and elevates work underway and helps to raise the profile of people doing that work. We would love to be in a position where we could, where we had the resources to support full-time equivalents for everybody, so that everyone could focus on this. That's not the case, and I don't see that changing. So what we're trying to do here instead is help to put some extra weight and to sort of amplify the work that you folks are already doing or think you could be doing with a little bit more support. So we won't be looking at this as a sort of a fixed number of hours. It would be more part of your proposal would be to tell us about your ability to meet the goals of this program and the objectives of this program through the sort of support and the resources and the efforts that you have underway currently, and then what this program can do to help augment and accelerate those efforts.
In addition to, producing those resources and, attending some conferences and doing some of those outreach efforts as well. So, it probably will vary from fellow to fellow exactly how long that will take, but we do hope that we'll get, similar outputs from each fellow, in return for the funding.
Two other points of clarification that have come in that I think are both great. One is the question of working with a single stakeholder group as opposed to multiple stakeholder groups. The projects that engage multiple groups in deep and meaningful ways, that's wonderful, and we'd love to hear about that. We don't mean to be restrictive when we say single. We just want to make sure that this is what we're trying to focus on is this bridge building between local food and regional food, and at least one of these areas. If this is a multi-stakeholder with a bunch of different points of engagement, that's great. That sounds like a wonderful approach, and we look forward to hearing more about it. And then there was a second question about letters of support as an addendum document. Yep, that's also perfectly acceptable. and can be a great way to demonstrate commitment on the part of participating partners. We didn't want to require letters of support because we understand that there are a number of different approaches here, and we wanted to leave it open to the applicant to sort of give us the information that you feel best supports the application. But letters of support are perfectly acceptable and a great way of demonstrating commitment from participating partners. I see a couple questions about funding level. And we have a few questions here that are fairly gritty, detail-oriented that include details that are included in the RFA. I'm not going to answer those on this. I'm going to direct people back to that RFA because that's definitely the governing document for the very specific stuff. Though I will say we are anticipating stipends of $15,000 or in that area, in addition to support for travel, meeting expenses, and tool development.
And just as a reminder, the RFA can be found at wallacecenter.org/RFE. Regional Food Economies is RFE.
Another clarifying question about timeline. We would anticipate a period of performance beginning May 1st of this year and running for 12 months. And I think there's a follow-up question about product development and how it will fit within the timeline. And I think I'll speak broadly about a couple of questions here about how timeline interacts with this work. We recognize that using a project-based timeline, like a 12-month system, in the context of work that can be many, many years long and involve many, many partners, that can be difficult. And that's part of the reason why we are so interested in understanding the work that you've already done and the work that you're continuing to do. This is not and sort of how that work can be used to meet the goals and objectives of this fellows program. So if part of the outcome of the work that you're doing involves product development or involves something that will occur outside of that 12-month period, then what we want to hear about is what you can do during that 12-month period to build these relationships and further the goals included in the RFA. I hope that's a helpful clarification.
Will, I've seen a handful of questions of people asking if there will be a recording of this webinar. We are recording it, and we're going to put it on that same website that I mentioned earlier, wallacecenter.org/RFE, probably by the end of this week. So that should be publicly available to be shared or listened to again, because it was so fun the first time.
Thanks, Ellie. A question about tying this work to graduate studies or to other academic pursuits. I think we would look at that the same way that we talk about tying this to the work that your organization is already doing. And so it's not that's not a problem. We would in fact anticipate that you or your organization is currently pursuing activities that meet the goals of this program. And what we want to hear about is how this is going to change that, how it's going to augment it, how it's going to help you overcome a challenge, or how it's going to sort of amplify or increase the impact of that work within the sort of towards the and help you in meeting the goals and objectives that we've laid out in the RFA. One good question here about that makes me want to, I'll make sure to not to sort of misspeak here on the role of food businesses, sort of community-based food systems, organizations, nonprofits, and whether there is a slant in this approach towards the towards sort of for-profit or towards business development. That is not the intention of this program. There are part of what brought us to this place in project development is the recognition that there are so many different points of engagement that can lead to the outcomes that we all want to see. So whether that's a nonprofit working with the working within the public health space, whether that is a for-profit business that's building out a collaboration with small business development centers, whether it is an institute of higher learning building out relationships with traditional agricultural service providers. What we really want to hear is from you on the approaches that you are seeing work and how we can help. So if we are not trying to be prescriptive in the kind of relationships lead to the goals and outcomes that we're looking for, that's part of what we're hoping to learn from you folks and to work together to make them even more impactful.
Well, I'm seeing a few questions about letters of support. And I think that sort of touches on something we discussed a little bit earlier about, if this is a project that is that has several different organizations contributing to it, a letter of support, I think, would be a great example of the kind of thing to be in an addendum, particularly if it's coming from an organization that is also involved in the project that the stipend would go to support.
Appreciate all the questions from you guys. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left if you want to get them in. For folks who have had specific technical questions or questions that you feel we haven't had the opportunity to answer, I'll reiterate, we are going to follow up in writing with some sort of rolled up frequently asked questions that we will put on our program website, wallacecenter.org/RFE. I think Ellie and I get a point every time we say the URL. This way everyone's going to remember. You are winning. And that site will also include the recording of this webinar. It'll also include the slides. It already includes the RFA itself, and it will include those frequently asked questions by the end of the week.
So I just advanced the slide and to show you all another reminder of the due date for these applications, which is less than 2 weeks away, and also the email address that you can utilize to submit your application and also to ask any further follow-up questions. Will and I are both manning that inbox, so we'll be the ones who receive any questions that you send there, and also the applications.
One other question that just came in that I think warrants repeating is is there a limit on the size of the addendum? This was a hotly debated topic. There is not a limit because by keeping it, by sort of leaving it to you folks to be able to share the material that you think is most impactful, whether that be a letter of support, whether that be an excerpt from a report or something else. We didn't want to sort of back you into a corner on page length. We will strongly encourage brevity because we do anticipate a lot of applications, and part of what we want to ensure here is that we understand what you're doing, how what you're doing is helping to advance these goals, and how this program is going to help you do that. So I think it's very unlikely that that your 300-page business plan and pitch deck is going to do that. What we really want to see is a little, something as short as possible that helps us understand that is what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, we will not come to regret not saying that there is a page limit on there. I think we need to sort of close up our time here. I know there are a few questions here at the end that we didn't get to. Again, we will follow up. I want to thank everyone on behalf of the Wallace Center, John, Ellie, and myself, for your participation and for all of your great questions, and most importantly, for all of the great work that you're doing around the country to help advance local and regional food systems as drivers of stronger, healthier, and more inclusive economies. A final reminder, everything you've heard here today, the questions and answers, everything we didn't get to, the RFA, the slides, hopefully everything you need to know to put together a painless application and help tell us about the great work that you're doing will be posted to our Regional Foods Economies website, wallacecenter.org/RFE, by the end of the week, along with the recording of this webinar. Ellie, do you want to do a last-minute conference plug?
So in addition to managing this project, Wallace Center has also been hard at work planning our biannual National Good Food Network Conference, which is next week in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There's a link in this slide deck to the website. If you've been considering coming, now is your last chance to register. It's going to be an excellent conference. We have 130 speakers, 4 amazing plenary panels, great site visits to unique and interesting New Mexico food organizations. We really think it's going to be a great event. So check out the website and book your flight last minute, and hopefully we'll see you in New Mexico. Thanks.
Thanks, Ellie, and thanks again to all of you. And we look forward to working together on this important work. This concludes the webinar.